The bell of the small stone chapel tolled just as the sun broke over the thatched rooftops. Its echo rolled through the muddy streets of the village, summoning every soul to the square. Merchants paused their wagons, children were dragged from their beds, and even the old men left their firesides, leaning on crooked canes. Today there would be a trial, not of a man, not of a woman, but of a pig. The year was 1386, and in the quiet town of Falaise in northern France, justice prepared to unmask the devil. The accused stood in a wooden pen at the center of the square, snorting softly, her hide caked with straw and filth. She had been washed, scrubbed, in fact, by the village blacksmith himself. Over her back they had draped a small rough tunic, sewn hastily from sackcloth, as if clothing could make her less of a beast. A rope was looped around her thick neck. 2 guards flanked her, solemn as executioners, halberds gleaming. The crowd stared with a mixture of fear and fascination. To them, this was no ordinary animal. She had killed a child. That alone made her something darker. The bailiff stood on the wooden platform, unrolling a long parchment. He began to read the charges in the same tone he used for murderers and thieves. For the grievous crime of slaying a human infant, the sow belonging to the peasant Jacques Lemoine shall be tried according to the laws of man and of God. Gasps rippled through the villagers. They crossed themselves. Some spat. It was whispered that the devil sometimes took the shape of beasts to test the faith of men. And when beasts killed, it was said, they were not beasts at all, but demons wearing flesh. The judge arrived next, his robes trimmed with faded fur, the symbol of royal authority stitched on his chest. Behind him marched a man few had ever seen before, the animal's appointed advocate. That was the law. Even a beast, if accused, must have a defender. He was thin, pale, and sweating, clutching a stack of papers with shaking hands. The people murmured, "Imagine it, defending a creature of the devil." The trial began. Witnesses were called. A woman with trembling lips spoke of hearing the child scream, of finding the pig's snout slick with blood. A shepherd claimed he'd seen its eyes glow red at dusk. Another man swore it had spoken, though no one quite heard what it said. The advocate argued the pig had simply been hungry, ignorant of sin, incapable of malice. He quoted scripture, law, even poetry, but no one listened. In their eyes, the animal was not a mindless thing. It had chosen evil. The judge's gavel struck. Guilty. The sentence, death by hanging, as was fitting for a murderer. The guards dragged the pig toward the scaffold erected beside the chapel. The crowd surged after them like a living tide, boots slapping mud, voices rising in fevered chant. Children were hoisted onto shoulders to see. Dogs howled. The pig squealed, high and human-like. Some swore they saw her weep. The priest raised his hands, chanting the last rites meant for human souls. The bell tolled again. The rope snapped taut. Silence crashed over the square, and in that silence something cold settled into the villagers' hearts. Not triumph, but a strange unease, like they had crossed a line they could not return from. A line where beasts could become criminals and men could become executioners. As the body swayed in the wind, no one spoke. They simply turned and went back to their homes, their shops, their fields. But something had changed. From that day on, every creature seemed to watch them with new eyes. And though no one dared to say it aloud, they all felt it. The world had grown thinner, like reality itself was cracking. They believed they had killed evil, but what if they had only fed it? The smell of burning tallow drifted through the rafters of the stone courthouse as another beast was led in chains across the floor. This time it was not a pig, but a gaunt black horse, ribs sharp beneath its hide, eyes wide and rolling white. The year was 1499, and the laws of France had grown stranger, darker, since that day in Falaise. Now there were books of statutes specifically for animals, pages that spoke of guilt, punishment, even repentance. The villagers filled the benches in eerie silence, watching the creature stumble on iron shackles. Beside it marched a notary, carrying a silver crucifix to ward off whatever unholy spirit might be riding in its bones. The case was read aloud. The horse had kicked its owner to death during the feast of All Saints' Day. The man's skull had cracked open on the cobblestones like an egg, and the townspeople had whispered that the blow was too precise, too clean, for any mere beast. It had been murder, they said, murder by intent. A chill passed through the room as the prosecutor spoke. He did not call it, but the accused, and when he pointed at the trembling horse, his voice dropped to a near whisper as though afraid it might understand. He claimed the devil had mounted the beast's soul like a rider mounts a steed, guiding its hoof straight to the man's skull. The defense, another thin, gray-faced advocate appointed by the court, argued the horse had been beaten for years, starved until its blood was wild with pain. What creature, he asked, would not strike out in desperation? His words fell into the void like stones into a well. The judges leaned forward in their fur-trimmed seats, faces pale in the candlelight. They muttered of omens, of the black horse of death from the book of Revelation. One juror crossed himself so many times his knuckles bled. When the gavel fell, the verdict came like thunder. Guilty. The sentence was public execution, that all who see may fear the Lord's justice. The next morning, the horse was dragged to the square, hooves slipping on frost-slick stones. The townsfolk stood in thick crowds, faces hidden behind scarves, as though ashamed yet unable to look away. They bound the beast to a post, nailed iron shoes to its feet, and fitted it with a black hood like a condemned man. Drums rolled. The headsman swung his blade. A single, sharp crack split the air. When the body collapsed, steam rose from its blood in the cold morning air. The crowd erupted in cheers that sounded more like screams. Children clapped, old women wept, and the priest raised his crucifix high as if warding off the invisible. But not everyone felt victorious. In the back of the crowd, an old miller whispered that he had seen the horse lower its head in surrender as if it understood its fate and accepted it. That night the villagers spoke in hushed voices. Why had the creature not fought? Why had it stood so still as death approached? Some said it had been guilty and knew it. Others said something darker, that maybe it had not been the horse who chose the killing, but something that still walked among them, laughing in the dark. The air in the village grew heavy, as though the invisible had taken notice. And far away, in distant towns, whispers began to rise about cats tried for witchcraft, dogs tried for theft, and even insects placed on trial for ruining harvests. The age of animal trials had only just begun, and its shadow was spreading. By the spring of 1510, the bizarre theater of animal trials had spread like a fever through the villages of France. But none were as infamous or as absurd as the trial of the rats of autumn. It began when the grain stores of the town were found hollowed, riddled with tunnels, and the fields stood stripped bare as bone. The peasants starved while the rats grew fat and bold, scurrying in the open streets as if mocking their human masters. The parish priest declared it divine punishment. The magistrates declared it treason. So the rats were summoned to court. Yes, summoned. A formal order was nailed to the church door, commanding all offending rodents to present themselves before the bar of justice. No one laughed. The people watched in solemn silence as the clerk of court read their names aloud, not individual names, but species, as though each creature bore a soul that could be called. Of course, none came. The following week, the lawyer appointed to defend them, Barthélemy de Chasseneuse, stood in the stone courthouse, his robes smelling faintly of mildew, and delivered one of the strangest legal arguments in history. He declared the rats could not attend because the roads were too dangerous. The villagers' cats lurked like assassins, waiting to murder them en route. Therefore, he said, the court must first guarantee safe passage for the accused. Murmurs rippled through the chamber, and the judges, rather than laugh, actually granted the request. They issued a decree forbidding the killing of any rat until the trial was done. For weeks afterward, the town of Autumn fell silent. Cats were locked indoors. Rats slithered like gray rivers through the alleys, unafraid, feasting on spilled grain. Some villagers whispered the rats were listening to the proceedings from the shadows. Still, they never appeared in court. Eventually, with no defendants present, the judges passed sentence in absentia, excommunication. They banished the entire species from the lands of Autumn as though human words could erase them from the earth. Bells tolled, psalms were sung, and yet that night, when the candles guttered out, the rats returned to the barns, their red eyes glimmering in the dark like embers. The people lay awake, clutching their rosaries, wondering if they had just declared war on something older and hungrier than law itself. This trial became legend. Even now, legal scholars study Chasseneux's defense as a masterpiece of logic, twisted into madness. But in the villages, people muttered of something else, how the rats seemed almost to understand, how their gaze followed the bailiffs with uncanny focus, as if mocking their human judges. The line between justice and superstition was fraying like old rope, and the world felt as though it was slipping quietly off its hinges. By the mid-1600s, the age of animal trials had spread far beyond France. Switzerland tried crickets for blasphemy. Italy held tribunals for moles accused of heresy. In Russia, a goat was dressed in rags and hanged as a sorcerer. The spectacle had become ritual, half justice, half theater, holy madness. But beneath the laughter and horror lurked something darker, the desperate human need to impose order on chaos. The last great animal trial took place in Versailles in 1750. A pack of feral dogs had torn through the royal orchards, devouring peaches meant for the king's table. The court convened in a gilded hall, chandeliers blazing, as if the universe itself were on trial. The dogs were dragged in on golden chains, their eyes wide, ribs sharp as knives. The prosecutor spoke as though addressing demons. He accused them of sabotage, of threatening the sacred hierarchy ordained by God himself. As he spoke, one of the dogs whined, a high, broken sound that echoed under the painted ceiling. It silenced the room. For a moment, even the judges froze. The defense begged for mercy, arguing that hunger is not rebellion, that beasts do not know thrones or crowns. The words hung in the air like smoke, but mercy had no place here. The verdict was death. The king's guards carried out the sentence in the palace gardens while the fountains sang and the roses bloomed. When it was done, the judges declared that justice had been restored, that the balance between man and beast had been reaffirmed. Yet that night, in the candlelit halls of Versailles, a page swore he heard scratching at the doors and low growls echoing through the marble corridors. The servants whispered the souls of the condemned were haunting the palace, demanding their own trial for crimes they never chose. That was the end. The age of animal trials withered, choked by its own absurdity. Courts quietly buried the records as though ashamed of what they had done. But the stain remained, and even now, in forgotten archives, you can still find the parchments, written in solemn ink, sealed with wax, accusing rats and horses and pigs of murder, blasphemy, and treason. They are relics of a time when humanity looked into the eyes of beasts and saw not innocence or instinct, but mirrors that reflected back their own fear, their own hunger for control, their own madness dressed in robes of justice. And maybe that is the most haunting truth of all, that the animal trials were never about animals. They were about us,